Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am so excited today to be sitting down with Jess Stone. Jess is the founder of Ruffly, where she works with women artisans to make ethical outdoor dog gear. And beginning in March of this year, she set off on a trip for 18 months around the world to promote fundraising for Girl Up. And she's doing this with her 75-pound German Shepherd named Moxie. So I'm so excited because we have so many things that we have shared interests in, and you're doing it in such a unique way. So I cannot wait, Jess, to share your journey with our listeners.
Christy, thank you so much for having me on. This is exciting.
Thank you. Well, to get started, I'd love for you to just take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll move from there.
Great. So I think you did a great job of introducing me. I am Jess Stone. I am the founder of Ruffly, like you mentioned, and we make ethical outdoor dog gear based in Guatemala. We work with indigenous Guatemalan artisans throughout the highlands of Guatemala primarily. And they work in small home workshops. And so the goal here is to get the women to use their traditional techniques, the traditional natural dyeing techniques that they use, their weaving techniques, but we pair that with modern and durable materials so that we can make dog gear, collars, leashes, beds, bandanas that not only look amazing and have the colors and vibrancy that Guatemala shows, but also be durable enough for, say, my 75-pound German Shepherd.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's one of the things that really drew me to your story when I started learning more, was seeing that you were working with artisans in Guatemala. We were just talking before we hopped on, but that's a place that's really special to me, and particularly the artisans. And so as you're describing women working in their in-home workshops, that's something I'm really familiar with. I've been able to visit some weavers and see what they're doing, and also to experience the innovation that they have of taking their traditional skills and modernizing it, much like you are sharing with your product. So I think it's such a amazing thing to see the entrepreneurial spirit and the tenacity of those women in those communities. It's like something I've never experienced before. So I can't wait to learn a little bit more about that part of your journey. But as we get started, I'd just love to hear from you about the role that travel has played in your life, and really when you did start traveling, and then we can see how that rolled into your own entrepreneurial journey.
Great. So my career previously was an international aid worker. I lived around the world, mainly in Africa, is where I sort of started working with international development organizations, really being on the ground there for years at a time. And I started my first independent trip, I would say, was in 2005 to Ghana. And I picked the most rural place that I could find. I picked a place that didn't have running water, it didn't have electricity. I wanted to have an authentic experience, and I really wanted to test myself. I grew up in Toronto in Canada, and my parents are Swiss, so we would often travel to Europe in the summers, but nothing that was very sort of out there in the developing world. And so I took it on myself to really test myself and go out there. And I had such a fantastic time in Ghana. And that just opened up everything from there. And then working in Uganda, in South Africa, my husband and I, we met in South Sudan. We've done a lot of traveling together, and all in places that might not be the typical tourism places, but they just have so much to offer. And it really sort of brought everything home for me when my husband taught me how to ride my motorcycle when we were living in Liberia together.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's so amazing that that was the first place that you decided to travel to. I think most of our listeners are probably not setting out to Ghana, although I would say so many people that listen to the show are really adventurous travelers, curious travelers, much like you, like really wanted to deeply connect to a destination. And so they're not going somewhere as a traveler to try to see anything that, you know, they've seen in a magazine, but they're really wanting to connect to community and nature, and also, like you said, to test themselves and understand who they are through the journey of travel, which I'm sure both you and I would relate that it is a place where you can really get to understand who you are and your strengths and the things that make you uncomfortable, and also to discover the things you're really passionate about and curious about and how you can bring those into your life moving forward. And also, as you were talking about learning to ride your motorcycle, it reminded me of backpacking in Thailand. And my girlfriend and I decided that we were kind of sick of taking the buses everywhere and hiking everywhere. And so we're like, we're going to figure out how to ride a motorcycle. And this lady we met in a rental shop threw us on the back of a little motorcycle, all three of us. And I'm almost 6 feet tall. So just me on that bike with her would have been awkward enough. And then she took us to like I don't know if it was an active or inactive runway, but she scurried all the cattle off of it. And then she gave us a riding lesson and then sent us on our way. And it was so fun and such a disaster. My friend immediately rode hers off the road and then got onto my bike, and we finished like heading to this waterfall and then got her bike out. Anyway, I know like that moment of learning how to ride a motorcycle, especially in a place like that where everything is already foreign and then you throw yourself on the back of a bike. What was that like for you?
So let me back up for a second. So for me, riding was never really something that I thought about. Yeah, I had been on the back numerous times in Africa because a lot of moto taxis, you can be on the back and they ride you around. And I was perfectly fine with that. But I came to Africa without really having a driver's license, never driven a standard vehicle before. And when we got to Liberia, my now husband, at the time my boyfriend, he was planning to do a large motorcycle trip. He's from Los Angeles. He did Los Angeles to Panama, ran out of money and couldn't continue all the way south. So his dream was to continue the trip. And when we met, he said he was going to live and work in Liberia for a year, save up and do the trip. And he said, you're invited to come along, but you can't ride on the back. You have to learn how to ride your own bike. So he taught me how to ride at a time where it wasn't something that I went into thinking, oh yeah, I want to be a motorcyclist. This is an identity thing for me. It's exactly what I want. No, I didn't really care about that. At the time, it was more, I'm really into this guy and I'd really like to continue this and see how it goes. And I'm willing to give it a try. Like, why not? Like, I could do this. And so he taught me how to ride. We bought two little 160cc like sport bikes that we could ride with. And he taught me how to ride on the side streets in Monrovia in Liberia, in the capital. And it was challenging to say the least. We had a lot of onlookers, people who were very curious to see a woman riding a motorcycle and were out there and sort of gauging what's going on and if they should be concerned. And for me, it was potholed roads, it was crazy traffic, it was just completely not what I was sort of expecting. And the whole time I was really anxious. I suffer from anxiety, which I know many people do, and it's something that has held me back in the past. And for this, it was something that I knew I needed to get done in order to be able to do this bigger trip as we went forward. So he taught me how to ride. We did about maybe 1,000 miles worth of practice while we were there. And then we went back to Los Angeles and then we bought our bigger bikes. I have a 650 and that's the bike that I rode with him from Los Angeles up to Canada and then down to Chile over 8 months.
Wow. That 8 months on a motorcycle, just, I'm like, no, I know that's so hard. And I know so many people do it and it would be so amazing, but I cannot imagine. And then also just, and we'll get into this as we talk about this journey too, like what it takes to plan for that and figure out what you need and, how to be strategic about what you have when you have such a limited space. I'm really curious about that. But before we go there, I would love to understand a little bit more about Ruffly. So you mentioned that you that's founded in Guatemala. That's where you're based for that company. How did you end up in Guatemala? And then how did all of these pieces kind of begin to be woven together to create Ruffly?
After we did our 8-month motorcycle trip, we ended up moving to New Orleans, and we were living in New Orleans for about 2 years. I had gotten my green card. Greg and I had gotten married. And so we were there for 2 years. After 2 years, I was ready to sort of move on. I was ready to get out of the States and go international again. And thankfully, so was he. And he was the one, we were both looking for positions, and he actually got a job working for a women's microfinance nonprofit in Guatemala, in Lake Atitlan, in Panajachel. And so we said, okay, let's do it. After 2 years in New Orleans, let's take our bikes, let's ride south, and let's start there again. And that's what we did. So we moved there. Greg was working for that nonprofit for about a year. I was working in marketing remotely at that time. And it was soon after we had arrived that I realized that we were going to be there for a while. Normally, every year or 2 years we would move, and I was thinking this is a place where we could hang out for a bit. I really enjoyed the community in Panajachel. It's a small community, probably about 15,000 people now. A lot of foreigners are there, so there's a lot of influx of imported goods and things that make you feel like home. But there's also a lot of culture. There's a bunch of towns around this lake that we live at, surrounded by 3 volcanoes. It's just picturesque and absolutely beautiful. So I said we were going to stay for a bit. And obviously my mind goes to, well, we need to get a dog. I have loved dogs forever, but always traveled and never really felt like I was in the right position to get a dog. And so there was somebody on the other side of the lake who had brought his 2 German Shepherds from the US and brought them with him. And this was their first litter. And I told Greg, we got to go over and let's just take a look. Like, we don't have to commit. Soon after we got there, we were playing with the puppies. And of course, like, they're all wonderful. And long story short, we ended up picking Moxie. And Moxie ended up becoming everything for us. And she was the motivation for Ruffly. When we were in Guatemala, I loved the beautiful colors, but I'm not somebody who wears that personally. Like, there are a lot of scarves. I'll wear a scarf that's very colorful, but there are things out there like full pantsuits and things like that have the textiles, or the huipil, which is their hand woven clothing that they wear. And each town has their own traditional style and look and design to it. And I didn't want it for myself, but I said, why can't my dog have that? Like, she needs to look fantastic. And so I started looking on the market to see what was available. And a lot of the stuff was either sort of really like foo-foo and wasn't going to be able to last for my shepherd, or it was a lot of it was leather. And I'm a vegetarian. I'm an animal lover. And so the whole leather part of it didn't really jazz me. And I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And so the microfinance nonprofit that Greg was working with, my husband, they had an artisan program, and they gave loans to women to do small businesses like their artisan work. And we connected with one of them and had a really fantastic conversation. She showed us what she could do. And then we started thinking, we could create a line of dog gear that would work for dogs like Moxie, big dogs, even small dogs, but something for that, that even though it's going to be handmade, that it's going to be durable and it's going to last. So we spoke with her. We had a nice conversation. We sort of talked through what our thoughts were in terms of design. She talked about her traditional techniques. We did a bunch of testing. And from there, it just grew. We started with collars and leashes, and then it expanded to doing more of the textiles of the beds. We have a bed roll that you can roll up and take with you. And then from there, after we did all of this range of dog gear, it came to the point of, wait, now I've got this dog, she's beautiful, and I want to take her everywhere, but I don't have a car. I only have 2 motorcycles. So what are we going to do about that? So then we had to go into figuring out how we're going to take Moxie along on our motorcycles. So we designed a motorcycle dog carrier that fits Moxie. And we had a connection with a welding shop in Panajachel where we were living. and went about sort of designing a carrier that would support 75 pounds. We had looked on the market, and I didn't want a sidecar. I didn't want a trailer. Those are two sort of beefy things that I didn't want to change my style of riding on two wheels. I had finally gotten comfortable with riding. I was feeling like it was what I wanted to be doing, the type of riding that I wanted to do. And in Guatemala, there's a lot of dirt roads. There's a lot of windy, mountainous roads. And having a sidecar or trailer like that makes it really tough to get around. And I didn't want to sacrifice that, but I did want to take my dog along. So we worked with the guys in the welding shop, and we came up with this frame. And then we connected with our artisans to do the upholstery, and they were able to hand stitch upholstery around it so that it was padded and comfortable for her. And from there, we started exploring together. It was an adventure learning how to ride with Moxie on the back. For somebody who never took a passenger, I never needed to take a passenger. Greg had his own bike, and I didn't really ride with anybody else. So I wasn't really used to that. I was used to having luggage on the back, but not a dog. So within a weekend, Moxie was ready to go. She leapt up there, she laid down, she was just so ready. Me, I was like pussyfooting on my bike just to feel comfortable with having the weight on the back. And, I wanted to be the one to take her. I sort of felt like she was my dog, and I wanted to be responsible for her. So I wanted to be the one that had her on the back. But with that comes a whole host of other anxieties as well, of being responsible for somebody, somebody that you love. And so it was a bit anxiety provoking, but soon enough, we were cruising down the road. We were doing off-road together. It was like a match made in heaven, because now I was able to take her we could ride for 2 hours around the lake, and she could go and play in the lake on the other side, or we could go somewhere to see a finca that had coffee, and we could do a tour together. There was a lot that we were able to do now that I was able to take her with me. And so now Ruffly has not only the dog gear component of the collars, leashes, beds, bandanas, but we also now sell the motorcycle dog carrier, the K9 Moto Cockpit.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I can't imagine. Like, I feel like so many dogs would love that experience, because they get to be like basically on top of you, and they're riding, and they're like fur is blowing in the wind. And
Yes.
for people listening, I really encourage you to check out their Instagram, and we'll talk about your video series later as well. But that dog, she is the happiest dog I think I have ever seen a picture of. I love seeing those pictures. And I think also, like, for me, the idea of being on a motorcycle, there's a lot of freedom, but also you're alone by yourself. So to be able to actually have your companion, your dog with you, and just kind of like not really feel like you're alone, I think that would be a really comforting and kind of fun experience as well.
Yeah, 100%. She just makes everything that much better. And we talk about with our other riders as well that it changes your ride, because now you're not just going to stop at a gas station to fill up when you're on a trip. You're going to want to stop at a nice green place so that she can go and run free, and you can play fetch, because she's going to have all of this energy, and you're going to want to play with her. You're going to want to go and have a picnic instead of going to a restaurant, So it really changes your outlook. You get to be more with the nature, with culture, in a way that you don't get to do when you're by yourself, or you don't think to do when you're by yourself, because nothing's pushing you to have to do it.
Yeah, that's such a good idea, or a good thought. I mean, even traveling with my children, and then we now travel with our dog too. That is, like you said, such a different way, because you're thinking about, okay, I remember this rest stop has this huge green area, and it actually also has a dinosaur museum inside, which is like a total lottery win when
Yes.
you're in that situation. And then, then you find another spot and another spot. And yeah, really, you are, instead of just like hurrying to get from one place to another, you're actually enjoying your journey, which I think should be the whole point. But sometimes when we're thinking about getting somewhere, we forget about the space between the places that you're traveling between.
Mhm.
Um, well, as we move through your journey, I would love to hear about Girl Up, which is a movement to advance girls' skills, rights, and opportunities to be leaders. And I know that it's really important to you, as is empowering young girls and helping to instill confidence in them. Obviously, it's important because you're spending 18 months raising money for them. How did that become a part of this journey?
So Go Roughly Around the World is our around the world adventure. We said 18 months initially. It's probably going to be longer, but initially it was 18 months. And the purpose of Go Roughly Around the World is to raise $100,000 for the nonprofit Girl Up. Like you said, they were founded by the United Nations Foundation, and their goal is to have gender equality. And that's what these girls are fighting for. And it was an important partnership for me, because when I had the idea to do this around the world trip with Moxie, which originally started because I wanted basically to be my own brand ambassador. It was a great opportunity to show off my business, the products that we're making with Ruffly, and to really just get out there. And I thought, who better to do it than me? Like I'm the one riding with the dog. So when we thought about it, it was okay. This is great for Ruffly, but I wanted to also mean something. I wanted there to be a larger goal. And obviously, we've been supporting a lot of women and artisans in Guatemala through Ruffly, but I wanted to have a bigger impact. So being in international development, like I've always sort of had my eye on different nonprofits that I've wanted to support throughout the years. And Girl Up has been one that I always wanted to do something with, but couldn't really figure out exactly how it would connect. But when I came up with Go Roughly Around the World, it just made sense. Um, they are a global nonprofit, so they're in 130 countries. They've supported 90,000 girls, I believe is the number, and they have projects in all different places. So I thought, wouldn't it make an amazing sense that while I'm going and doing this around the world trip, I'm getting a chance to meet the girls that are in these Girl Up clubs and hear about their stories and hear about the issues that they are fighting for. And so it just seemed like a win-win in that sense. And the reason why I had my eye on Girl Up was because they provide leadership and development training for these girls. And it's something that I always wished that I had. I'm somebody who suffers from imposter syndrome. I always doubt myself. I have a lot of those anxieties. And to be honest, it's really held me back throughout my life. And it's only now in the past few years where I feel like I'm continuing to grow and I feel like I'm getting into a better place. But I think back and think if I had had a Girl Up club where I had other girls who were going through similar things that I was at that time, and having a role model or somebody who will help sort of instill those skills and that confidence, I could have been a lot further than where I was now. And I think about that about the girls. If the girls that are there, they're gunslingers. When you hear them talk, they're just these change makers. They've got this confidence. And even the girls that are new to the club, like they soon get I guess they get into this group and they start to blossom, and it's fantastic. And so I just really jive with that idea. And especially as a woman motorcyclist, somebody who's in a male dominated field, it's and doing a lot of things in my life that it's more manly, I guess, or male dominated than it is typical for a female to do it. I want the girls to have a chance to do whatever they want to do, and I want them to feel comfortable doing it. And I feel like Girl Up has the right mission, and I've seen it in action. So I just really support it. And so that's why I went to them. We had a conversation. We decided to partner. So it's $100,000 fundraiser. 10% of our Ruffly products and sales go towards the fundraiser as well. And people can donate directly to Girl Up, and it's tax deductible in the States.
Yeah. Um, I think that it's so amazing that how you kind of were able to bring that passion together. I think a lot of us, when we're entrepreneurs and travelers and people that are really curious, we have all of these things that we are really excited about. And so, like you said, to know that you had your eye on how you could support Girl Up and you were waiting for the opportunity and then the way that you could bridge that together, I think that's really amazing. And then to even add more value personally to the ride around the world, for you to be able to connect with these groups, like you said, and really hear their stories and move through the world in a different way. Again, much, like you were saying before, just you're slowing down, that the intention is each of these points along the way as well. I think that's really a powerful awareness to think about how you can create travel. I'm getting ready to travel with my daughters. I have 3 daughters, so that's also why Girl Up is something that I have been drawn to. And we're going to travel for a year around the world, and so we have also been talking about, like, what else can we do with our trip to make it more impactful for us and for others. And so I love that you were able to bring these pieces together. Um, well, how did you, when you then started to plan your trip, was it based on where these programs were? Is that how you chose the countries that you wanted to travel to? You've obviously traveled quite a lot already by motorcycle, so it probably wasn't as much about places you wanted to be, but what did that process look like for you?
The planning process had a lot to do with weather. As a motorcyclist, like, you want to make sure that you're riding in nice weather, that it's not snowing or ice, which is dangerous. So when we planned it, we were starting from Guatemala in March, which is fantastic time. It's still the dry season. And on when we were planning it, when we did our first trip for 8 months, when my husband and I did it without Moxie, we didn't make it as far north as we wanted to. We only made it up to Whistler in British Columbia in Canada. We didn't get all the way up to the top, to the Arctic Ocean, which was our initial goal. So obviously that was on the list. Like, we wanted to have that as a, a mark for us to say that we have achieved it. So when we planned it, we planned to come north first, so that we would make the top of North America in the middle of the summer, and then start heading down south to get to the bottom of South America when the weather was still nice. And Girl Up has clubs all around. In Mexico, they have them in Guatemala, Mexico, and in the US. So we were able to see them as we came up. And we actually brought one of the Girl Up Club members from Mexico City on board with us as Ruffly. And so she also helps with the coordination with the different clubs, and when we're coming through, and some of the social media support as well. So we were able to sort of tap into her and her network as well to get this going. But we did plan from Guatemala to go up through Mexico. We saw some of the Girl Up clubs in Mexico City, and then we came up through the US, got into Canada, and then we made it to the Arctic Ocean, which was a huge achievement. From a motorcycling standpoint, that stretch is the Dempster Highway, which is on the Canadian side. From Basically, you come from the Yukon into the Northwest Territories, and then you get to the top where the Arctic Ocean is. And it's 1,600 kilometers round trip of dirt and gravel and mud. And it's a difficult stretch. It's not paved at all. So it's a lot of skills building that you need in order to be able to ride that. And for me, that was always my boogeyman. And when we did the 8-month trip the first time and we didn't make it, I was sort of relieved. Like, I was a new rider at that time, and I didn't feel like comfortable to do it. This time I took courses while we came through the States. I took some off-roading courses. I practiced as we went up, and it was tough, but we made it. We got to the Arctic Ocean, and Moxie put her paws in the ocean. I got to go and splash around as well with her. But it really made all the difference to have that practice and that achievement, that feeling of actually getting there and doing a thing that you set out to do. It was really spectacular for me.
Yeah. Oh, I can't imagine that stretch of road. So I hadn't really thought about that until you said it, but what it takes to prepare for that. And then you were talking about the mental piece of it, which, someone from the outside maybe hearing about your story would think, oh, well, that's must be going to be really easy because they've already ridden motorcycles for 8 months, but it is such a different technical aspect. And I think that that's where, when people really start to kind of be enraptured with travel, is being able to watch yourself go through that journey
Mhm.
and have that experience and internalize it. And now that you take that forward for the, the rest of your travel experiences, I think that also really ties in with the way that Girl Up is working to instill that in the women and the girls that are in their communities. So I think it's just such a powerful connection. For people that are listening that are curious about this kind of travel, what would you suggest to them to get started, or to even to push themselves if they are already a motorcyclist that wants to take on this kind of adventure?
I think for motorcyclists, the key thing I will always say is take a class, practice. I took a class with Rawhide Adventures when we were in California. Basically, went through sort of an obstacle course to practice those skills at slow speed, so that when you are out on the trail, you feel a lot more confident. And that's really the key, I think, when it comes to motorcycling, wanting to take on this type of adventure. And then the other thing I'd say is see what other people have done and see what parts of the travel that you like, because you can have 10 motorcyclists and every single one of them does it slightly different. They do different things. Like, for example, when we're on the road, we ride for 4 days and then we stop and we work for 3 days. So it's not consistent riding. It gives us time to camp for 4 days, do all the fun stuff that we want to do, explore and sightsee and do the riding that we want to do. And then we've got the 3 days where we're working on our video series and social media and our business. But by the time the 3 days of work are done, we're ready to get back on the road. And it's the same thing with the 4 days. When we're finished the fourth day of camping 4 nights in a row, we're ready for a place that has a hot shower.
Mhm.
So it's sort of a nice mix. And so if you're thinking about doing this type of adventure travel, you got to find what works best for you. Some people do weeks straight of riding and then they feel really burned out and they can't sort of figure out why, that they've gotten to this place where they're supposed to be enjoying it, but they're exhausted. And then they start to feel guilty that they're not taking advantage of everything that they should be. And then you get that feeling of being burned out. So learning yourself as you go along is key, and seeing what other examples are out there of what you think would work best for you. And obviously starting with smaller trips and seeing, making sure that you like your gear. Like, nobody wants to find out on their first day of their round the world that their sleeping bag is not warm enough. Like, these are things that you want to test. Same thing with packing. So those are all things that motorcyclists need to think about when they're doing this type of trip. And if you're not a motorcyclist and you're in a car and you're thinking about, for example, doing the Dempster Highway or riding the Dalton up to Prudhoe Bay in Alaska, um, there's a lot of people out there who have done it, and can have great advice on making sure you have the right tires and the right tools in the event that anything goes wrong with your vehicle. But it's really an adventure. And as much as I say, go and look and see what other people have done, it's really your own, and you got to make it your own so that you can feel like you've come out of it with something more than what you started with.
Mhm. I think it really translates to all long-term travel experiences as well. That much like you were saying, if you have a really ambitious travel schedule, you'll find yourself getting to places and not really being able to engage because you've been so burnt out. And I've been thinking about that a lot with preparing to travel with my daughters, of like, okay, I think we could probably do, a couple weeks of some, more aggressive touring at the beginning, and then we definitely need to find a spot to like pull up that has a swimming pool where they can relax, and
Yes.
then think about now where we're going to go, and really, like, I've been watching my kids, seeing how they move through their day and what things they really enjoy, and noticing what activities they like, so I know when they're going to be outside of their comfort zone or what they're not enjoying, and not to put a bunch of those things together, because if
Yes.
one person wants to do this and the other doesn't do that, like, it's just those subtleties, I think, when you're thinking about this type of travel, are the things that will hopefully help you to build towards success and having a more enjoyable long-term travel experience. So you are about 10 months in, is that right
So
now?
we're 8 months in.
8
So we
months.
started March 5th in
Okay.
Guatemala, made it to the Arctic Ocean at the beginning of August. Now we have come south. We're in Baja, Mexico right now. And now we are going to continue south. So we're going to go down to get to the tip of South America. From there, we will go over to South Africa. We'll come up the east side of Africa, and then we'll be in Europe and do a tour of Europe. And then we will go east. We'll go through the stands. We'll go through, we want to go through India. We want to go through Asia on that side. And then from Malaysia, we will probably ship our bikes back to Guatemala and end in Guatemala.
Yeah. How will you go from South America to South Africa? Will that be by boat, or will you ship the bikes and fly for that transition?
We'll ship the bikes for that. It's probably, I think it's about 4 to 6 weeks. I can't remember exactly, but we will ship it and then we will fly. And unfortunately, my big beast over there, her 75 pounds needs to go in unaccompanied cargo because she is so big. She needs to be in a giant sized crate. She couldn't just keep those ears down and let us be in a normal sized crate, but she's a giant sized crate dog. So we have to find an airline that will take her, and she will fly.
Yeah, and that's also something too that's really interesting. I know a lot of people that have traveled with pets or adopted pets, and that adds a whole nother layer of complexity to international travel with dogs. I don't know if that's something you want to share, but I don't think that's something we've talked about before on the podcast. But just thinking about that, that is something that is can be a really difficult thing to do.
Oh, 100%. When we started the trip, when we were planning the trip in June last year, the CDC in the States had put out a ban on dogs coming from high-risk rabies countries, and Guatemala was on that list. And so in order to bring a dog from Guatemala into the States, you needed to apply for a permit in advance. You had to get a rabies titter test done from an approved CDC lab. So you basically draw the blood in Guatemala, send it to the States, have them test it to make sure that she's got the antibodies. And then you had to pay and get a veterinarian certificate for it and then hopefully be approved. And it was only meant for people who were coming back to the States for business or for schooling, or for emergency purposes. And we didn't necessarily fill any of those reasons why. But the other issue was that you would have to fly. They wouldn't allow you to go by land. You could only fly into 3 designated airports. So that would have been, when we did the price of it all, it would have been about $6,000 to get her from Guatemala to the States. And then we said, I'm not sure about that. So hypothetically, what we could have done is we could have taken a trip across the border from Guatemala to Mexico and say to a Mexican veterinary a vet and say, here's her rabies certificate in her pet passport. Do you think that you could maybe make her a Mexican dog? Because Mexico was not on the list of high-risk rabies countries. So potentially you could do that and get a certificate saying, oh yeah, Moxie is from Mexico. And so that when you cross into America by land, they won't say anything. Which, when we entered into the US, they didn't even ask for her vaccination card. They didn't ask for anything. They saw Moxie on the back of my bike and were all excited about it. And that sort of got them to not ask too many questions. So there are rules like that. There are certain other countries that won't allow you to enter if you've been in rabies countries in the past. And some countries like Australia, for example, has a quarantine on pets if you're coming from a high-risk rabies country. But in general, it just requires a lot of research, figuring out what each country needs as you go. A lot of the times it's just to make sure that she has her up-to-date rabies vaccination. Sometimes it'll require a vet check, like a certificate saying that she's in good health, that they have checked to see that her rabies certificate is valid, that she's had her flea treatment, all of those types of things. But it's not like it's the hardest thing in the world, but it does require you to do research in advance. Because, for example, when we went to Belize requires you to fill out something online a couple days in advance to upload some documents, and that needs to be approved before you enter. And we had that done because I had researched it, but we saw other people who were there with their pets and were like, wait, I thought we could just come. And the officials were trying to say, no, we have this process. And unfortunately, they hadn't checked beforehand, and then they were denied entry. So it's that type of thing. And I've got obviously a whole list of countries and requirements of entries and exits for each of them, for her. So that's something that I keep track of for her. And then obviously for the vehicle, of importing and exporting the vehicle in all these different countries.
Yeah, it's such a daunting task when you really start thinking about all the moving pieces. And it's so interesting because you see somebody, setting off on an adventure like you, and you think, oh, this is so freeing. They're just on their motorcycle and here they go. And really pretty quickly you realize, you're navigating all these things. And then of course, during this time in our existence, you're thinking about things that have changed due to COVID and timing of that. And then also just being aware that at any moment things can switch because, in the past you could have mapped this all out and been pretty sure that when you get to that destination 6 months later, it's going to look like it did when you thought about it originally. And so it's kind of a little bit like disheartening that it isn't that free experience that you might think that it is when you set out to be kind of become a world traveler, especially like you said, if you add moving vehicles and dog transportation and all of these other things. But for you though, what gives you the most joy out of this type of experience and this type of travel?
Having Moxie with me the whole time, being able to ride with my best friend and my human best friend as well, it really just enhances the experience. I've taken solo trips myself. I've taken solo trips with Moxie as well. And it's just that feeling of being on the road, having her with me. And, the joy that it puts on other people's faces, it really brings something to me as well. Like, you can't imagine how many people are leaning out of their cars taking videos of Moxie as we're passing by, or at a gas station about, oh my God, she wears goggles. All of those types of things we get all the time. People wanting to take photos with her, and it puts a smile on everybody, young, old. Like, it's just amazing that she just has that impact on people. And I like that, because sometimes in this life, like, you don't get a chance to smile that much, or there aren't that many things out there when it's a crazy world like this that make you excited. And to give somebody just a little piece of that when they see us riding by, it brings me pleasure too. So I'm glad that we're able to do that.
Yeah, you're in your own way just spreading joy as you're
Yeah.
traveling, because you get to be the center of that. They have a fleeting moment, but you get to kind of have that over and over and over again. So I would imagine that that would be pretty rewarding. And like again, I go back to checking out the Instagram and your video feed and really looking at it. And speaking of that, people can follow along your journey. So you decided to do this, but then also to document it in a really encompassing way, which is also difficult when you're traveling. What has that part of your journey been like? And then also, where can people find that if they want to follow along?
Sure. So we have a YouTube series, Go Roughly Around the World. We put out a new episode every Sunday. It is a labor of love. It sure is. We film the 4 days that we're riding, we're filming. That's 4 GoPro cameras, 2 iPhones. And so it's a lot of footage that we go through. So the days that we're working, we spend time really editing it down and really giving people the opportunity to see what it's like to travel around the world with a big dog, to see the funny things about camping with her, when the excitement that she gets when she sees a bear on the side of the road, or when we're out seeing something and something's a little bit fishy and we're filming it, like it's just fun stuff to be able to experience that journey with us, and we enjoy sharing it. So that's what we have. So they're about 20 minutes long, 25 minutes long episodes, something that you can really sit there and watch with your coffee in hand, and so you can see that every Sunday on YouTube. It's Go Roughly Around the World. And we continue to put out more and more content on our channel. So we're also, like you mentioned, on Instagram if you want to see some great shots of Moxie. And my captions are sort of like mini blogs. If you go and see my Instagram, I like to sort of give my view of what I'm going through from a motorcycle's perspective, from a woman's perspective, from a human's perspective. Just share some of my challenges that I go through and what I'm thinking about. And I hope that it resonates with people and that they get something out of it too, which is the purpose of why I'm sharing it. Because it's taken me a long time to get here, like I mentioned before, and feel like I'm in this good place. And I want to share some of that because maybe it'll help somebody along the way as well.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you did also mention that, because that was another point of connection and resonance for me when I did find your story, was that, I was drawn to those images, but then I started to click in and actually read the content, and I was like, oh wait, I didn't actually expect this. It's a lot more vulnerable and authentic and deep that I wasn't expecting when I saw the pictures and the story and the narrative, and it's really beautiful. So I thank you for creating that, because I think it again really helps us to see ourselves and other people's journeys and experiences, and also to understand the power of travel and reflection and the ways that this can be such an important part of our life. And so I am one of the people that really does appreciate it. So thank you for creating and sharing the way that you have. As we begin to end our conversation, I'll just remind people that they can learn more about Girl Up on your website. I will also share the links with this podcast episode. But before we end, I just have a few rapid fire questions. So we'll jump into those for people to get to know you as a traveler a little bit more. What are you reading right now?
I'm actually reading one of Lois Price's books. Lois Price is this motorcycle traveler. She did a ride through Iran. It's called Revolutionary Road. It's fantastic. She talks about what it's like to ride as a woman in this place where women generally are not that welcome. And it is a fantastic read.
Oh my goodness. So I'm just putting together my reading list. I have a women's book, Sojourn. And so we read all these books that kind of allow us to experience another culture, a context for women, and also a little bit of adventure. And I literally just published it today, but I might have to go and look at that book and see. It might have to be at least a recommended add-on, because that sounds amazing. What is always in your suitcase or backpack, or actually it's probably going to be bike
My
bag.
side cases.
Yeah, for you.
Okay, well, my things are really basic because you can't really take so much on a motorcycle. Something that I always have, oh, I know, chapstick. That one's easy. Chapstick. The wind is horrible when you're riding, especially I like to ride with my visor up so I can feel the wind on my face. Lips get chapped. Always have chapstick in the front of my tank bag, right in that little bag on top of my bike.
Yeah, I was thinking it was going to be chapstick or sunscreen or lotion or some sort of
moisturizer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and Moxie also, for Moxie, she has her own moisturizer. She has a spray moisturizer that I put on her so that her skin doesn't get too dry. And she has a schnaut balm that I put on her nose as well to keep her moisturized.
Yeah. And I'm sure those are things you wouldn't think of, right, initially. And then you learn and you're like, oh no, this is a must need for my dog as well. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there, which is something I know you're very familiar with. Where is a place that you would like to sojourn?
For me, I think it would still be Ecuador in Quito. We passed through there obviously on our first trip, and I just fell in love. It's a place that I want to go back. I would love to do 5 years in Quito and be there. I loved the culture. I loved the climate of being at altitude like that, and the activities that are available there. I think it's just perfect for me. So that's one place.
Yeah. What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
Rolex. So in Uganda, and I think probably Kenya probably has them as well, definitely in South Sudan, a Rolex is like a chapati with egg. They have a cabbage inside sometimes, onions and tomatoes, and it's rolled up. It's greasy. It's lovely. So anytime we're at a place that has chapati, which you don't get that often, but when we do, I will make a Rolex and it brings me right back to there.
Mhm. Who is the person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
My parents, but in a negative way, I guess I'd say. So like I said, my parents are from Switzerland. They moved in their 30s. They couldn't have children. They thought they couldn't have children, so they left Switzerland in their 30s, went to Canada and settled. Within a month, my mother was pregnant with my sister. And then I came along 3 years later. They settled in Canada and loved it and didn't ever want to leave again. And so for me, I wanted to leave. I was the one who, it was my Switzerland, I wanted to go out and do something different. And so they never prevented me from going. They weren't 100% encouraging, but I think that they understood the independence that I had because it was the same thing that sort of drew them to Canada. So in that sense, I'd say my parents.
Yeah. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
I'd say my husband. I know that sounds cheesy, but he is just my everything, like he is. I like I said, I met him in South Sudan. He was also an aid worker, somebody who I feel like we're equals. We really just get along. We are each other's person, and being able to be on the road with him, he gets me, I get him. It connects. So it's still work. I'm not saying that it's not work. Communication is always work, but having it and being with somebody like that, it just is just a really special thing.
Yeah, that's so amazing. What a blessing to be able to experience that. Uh, so, the Soul of Travel is about highlighting and celebrating women who are doing impactful things in the world through travel. Is there someone who you admire that you would like to recognize in this space?
Well, now that I'm reading Lois Price, I would say Lois Price again. And I recognize her. So she's British, and she was sort of my inspiration when I was learning how to ride. We obviously, I said I started when we were in Liberia. I didn't really have any role models. Everything that I did was online. I didn't know what I was supposed to wear, how I was supposed to feel like as a woman rider, no idea. Lois Price was the one who came up when I started searching for women writers, and I just connected with her. She's like I mentioned, she's a fantastic writer. She's written all around the world solo, and it's just she really inspired me to do a lot of what I understand now to be a woman writer and what that means. So I say Lois Price 100%.
Yeah. Well, that was it. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I loved hearing about your journey, but I also really appreciate how you are sharing the world with others and supporting Girl Up along the way. I think it's such a beautiful story, and I really hope that people will be curious and follow along and support you on your mission as well.
No, thank you so much for having me and letting me share some of my story.
Thank you.